I spend a lot of my time playing video games, and I often worry that I'm wasting my life. As far as the medium has come in the last 30 years or so, it remains pretty juvenile, locked in particular forms of genre fiction and franchise worship that make it very hard to take video games seriously. I know we've progressed, or regressed, depending on your point of view, past this comparison, but I often think I'd be better served watching any given movie than playing most video games. For an unfair but maybe demonstrative comparison, we can contrast the Game Awards, Jeff Keighley's embarrassing trailer showcase that is nonetheless the biggest mainstream annual award show for the medium, to the Golden Globes, a B-tier film and TV award show that began life as a method of advertising American film achievements to foreign markets. This year at the Game Awards, the nominees were PlayStation Brand Worship, Roguelike Poker, Anti-Woke Dark Souls, Regular Dark Souls, Act 2 of Final Fantasy VII, and Medieval Persona. With the exception of Shadow of the Erdtree, which is genuinely an incredible work of art, none of these games come close to the aesthetic achievement of the winner of Best Film Drama at the Golden Globes, The Brutalist. And I'm here to tell you, Brady Corbett's historical faux biopic about a Hungarian architect's troubled relationship with the United States, his wealthy patron, and his wife is honestly just pretty good. It's alright. It looks great, but its core allegories and themes are mostly really obvious and cloying, except for its weird ambivalence about Zionism, and it's a much goofier movie than people are willing to admit. But look, it's 3.5 hours, and it's head and shoulders a better use of your time than a run or two of Balatro. And look, I'm not saying that every video game needs to be a serious drama for adults. What I am saying is that as I get older, the amount of time and thought I give to this medium seems to be rewarded less and less frequently with the emotional and mental stimulation that a merely good movie can provide me. So, I find myself in a bit of a crisis. Why the hell am I playing video games at all? Would I be better off just doing something else, anything else? More precisely, I found myself wondering, is there something specific about video games that makes them worth playing and thinking about and talking about, even if they're not always that great? What's the point of playing video games? The game that broke me out of this crisis was Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Look, before we go on, I want to make sure there's no misunderstanding. I'm not saying that I lost faith in video games and then Indiana Jones was so transcendently good that it restored my faith in the medium's potential. Nothing like that, nothing so cliche. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is, like The Brutalist, just good. Occasionally, it's great. But it's not of such singularly high quality that it competes with the great works of human creativity. It's not an artwork on par with, I don't know, Yi Yi or No Country for Old Men. Hell, it's not on par with an artwork like Disco Elysium or Pathologic 2. But it still provided me with a resolution to the question of why I play video games. And the answer, in short, is to have an aesthetic experience of action, or to experience existence as a form of art.
Sweet dreams.
To catch you up in case you haven't heard of it before, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is the latest from development studio Machine Games, who are most recently known for the Wolfenstein reboot series, including Wolfenstein The New Order, Wolfenstein The New Colossus, and, unfortunately, Wolfenstein Youngblood. The first two games in this reboot series have cemented Machine Games' reputation as a studio doing interesting, smart work within the AAA space. The New Order, and to a lesser extent The New Colossus, are smart, funny, well-written, and emotionally potent games that demonstrate at the studio level an ability to work within established game genre conventions while transcending them through earnest commitments to character-driven storytelling. Machine Games, in other words, have become known as a studio capable of doing interesting work within the AAA space, something that's becoming increasingly rare. Now, if you don't know what Indiana Jones is, well, there's a total of about 3.5 excellent movies for you to go watch before you come back to this video. Go on, I'll wait. Anyway, now that you're back, The Great Circle is a sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, taking place about a year after the events of that film. The game is a side story with very little connecting it to the other films, aside from the appearance and mention of a few secondary characters from the other movies. A giant man that looks mysteriously like Tony Todd breaks into Marshall College, Indiana Jones's place of work, and steals a cat mummy. Jones, wanting to distract himself from his recent breakup with Marion, his romantic interest from Raiders, pursues the giant to the Vatican to find out what the deal is with the cat mummy. What follows is a mystery involving the first language spoken by man in Judeo-Christian mythology, Adamic, as well as a great circle of artifacts across the globe with Adamic script on them that have magical powers. As usual, fascists are after the artifacts for their magical powers, and it's up to a plucky, handsome academic to find the artifacts before the Nazis and the Italian fascists do. The details don't really matter for this video, but suffice to say that the core mystery of the artifacts is fun and interesting. In a Raiders and Last Crusade kind of way, it's implied that elements of Christian mythology are materially real, while also suggesting that the governing metaphysics of reality are beyond human understanding. There's something fun about chasing after the true name of God. It tickled that very childish desire in me to uncover some grand secret about the world. If you followed any of the coverage of The Great Circle, then you probably already know that the game has been very well received, and that positive critical response also came with a certain shock that The Great Circle was not made in the style of Machine Games' Wolfenstein series. In other words, it's not a shooter, nor is it really an action game. It's a game with action in it, but there's no point at which you really feel that action, either of the violence or platforming varieties, is the game's priority. If you needed to put a genre label on it, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a first-person adventure stealth game with puzzles and platforming. Its semi-open structure makes it seem almost like an immersive sim, but with a narrower range of tools at your disposal. You can wear costumes to blend into certain areas of the map, a la Hitman, but this system isn't as fleshed out or demanding as Hitman. It has a basic and fun first-person brawling system, and you can shoot guns, but the action most often feels like a way to create tension as you're navigating an environment, rather than a system to be mastered. This mix of mechanics adds up, rather curiously, to a gameplay experience that feels unified around the sensation of being in a space. Nothing more and nothing less than just feeling like you're in a cool location. You might say that's not specific to the Great Circle at all, that most AAA video games want nothing more than to make you feel like you're an actor in a cool space. And yeah, that's the whole point of this video. I'm making a general claim about the medium overall. More to the point though, if that's an implied goal in mainstream game design, then I think a lot of games get in their own way as they try to reach that goal. Think about the way the average Ubisoft game, particularly the Assassin's Creed series, transforms the wondrous spaces you're placed in as a player into a checklist to be completed. I'm too busy thinking logistically about towers and loot crates to care that I'm in what was, at the time, a compelling recreation of Rome. I don't feel like I'm acting in a space. I feel like I'm manipulating variables with a loose kinesthetic and representational wrapper that obscures the fact that I'm just doing work. This is, to my mind, the primary way that games obscure their values. Big games are Skinner boxes designed to maximize your time on device. Logistical thinking, or thinking about space as data, as information, as something to be managed, gets in the way of the other possible experiences you could be having. But while that's the main way that games stop you from feeling like an active participant in a cool space, it's not the only way. Another way that's maybe even more common now that I think about it for like half a second, is an excess of player empowerment. There is also, in my opinion, an incompatibility to feeling like you're present in a space while you're actively able to transcend that space's limitations. For example, when you zoom around New York in the new Spider-Man games, you don't feel like you're in New York. You're in a New York-themed playground that provides a sensation of agility and speed, but there's very little sensation of presence. However, if you slow down a bit, I think that sense of presence does return. If you perch yourself atop a building, in the stillness of that action, Spider-Man begins to feel a little human again. He, like me, is slow and still, and looking out at a city in the way that I might from New York's various vantage points. And what Indiana Jones does very well, relative to most AAA video games anyway, is make you feel like a human being. A very tough, athletic, capable human being, but a human being.
Been a pleasure, Slim.
A lot of this comes down to the speed at which you move, the lack of regularity with which you deal out death, and the relative groundedness of what you're doing at a moment-to-moment basis. Let me demonstrate. Watch this sequence. This is the big, exciting final escape from a collapsing temple scene, with Indiana's climbing speed pretty moderately upgraded.
Jesus!
And here is a completely typical, boring platforming sequence from Uncharted 4, the native to video game series which most thoroughly rips off the Indiana Jones films for its aesthetic inspiration. Look how quickly Nathan Drake moves relative to Indy. The inhumanity of Drake's physical prowess is really thrown into relief here, I think. And this is to say nothing of Uncharted 4's big action sequences, where Drake leaps more or less effortlessly from vehicle to vehicle, slaughtering dozens of goons. And look, I'm not saying that in a vacuum this sequence isn't cool. Honestly, it kinda rocks, ideologically problematic as it is, but it's very funny that Drake is doing stuff like this when the whole appeal of the character is that he's supposed to be, relative to most video game protagonists, an average guy. Look, see? He's just like me. He also disappoints his wife. I'm just kidding. I don't have one. The point is that through animation and gameplay design, Machine Games is able to provide Indy a physicality which seems more in line with what a human is capable of, rather than making the hunky archaeologist into a superhuman. And what they achieve by doing that is a gameplay experience where, despite all the supernatural and mythological stuff you're witnessing, you feel like a guy doing stuff. You know, like a person. And that's much rarer than you'd think, especially in the AAA space. And what that creates is a sense of presence, a sense of constraint that makes you feel like you're a human being in a world. The methodical pace of the climbing, the fact that I'm not firing a gun constantly, and little things like the way that most inventory items aren't glued to you in the way they usually are in games. Like how I have to drop my makeshift club to unlock this door. These things don't just make Indy feel human, they reflect my own humanness back to me. In representing a calmer, more methodical, more grounded kind of physicality, I am more able as a player to recognize myself in the way that video game Indiana Jones relates to his world. And this is what I mean when I say that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle helped to remind me that video games are, at their core, aesthetic experiences of action. It's very easy when playing a video game to get caught up in checklisty structures or power fantasies that are so far beyond the average human experience, you can forget that what video games provide us in a way that no other medium is presently capable of are grammars of action that create miniature experiences of what it is to be a person. If you're someone watching this video who is coming from some form of game studies, what I'm saying here probably sounds very familiar. It probably does if you're coming from forums, too. Everywhere you look, you find people saying that what makes video games unique as a medium is something like player agency, interactivity, something like that. Now, I'm very intentionally not using those words, agency and interactivity. Game studies scholar Sonia Fizek has demonstrated in her book Playing at a Distance that something much more complicated than interactivity is happening when we play a game. When we play a game, we are delegating our agency, or our ability to affect change in the world, to the apparatus of the video game console or computer, and in so doing, our experience of action is weirdly passive and determined by the game machine itself, and not by us. So I'm not talking about agency. I don't think that games empower us. And I think interactivity is not the right word for what I'm talking about either. I'm saying that games are defined by action. Game studies folks might recognize that I am specifically referring to an old article by Alexander Galloway titled Gamic Action 4 Moments. In this essay, Galloway makes a strong claim about the essential qualities of the video game. Quote, "Begin like this. If photographs are images and films are moving images, then video games are actions. Let this be word one for video game theory." Unquote. In other words, what defines the video game as a medium is that the operator and the game machine are caught in a constant process of action. Even when you're not actively pressing buttons in the game, the software is still running and still acting. Galloway goes on to develop a typology of video game action, covering the background processes of video game machines and the actions of players in both the context of the fictional activity of games and the stuff that is happening outside of the diegetic world of the game. We don't need to get into that typology here, except to say that Galloway is writing this book at a relatively early moment in game studies, where people are working to figure out what's different about games, and are trying to develop a language to talk about the medium. And like every typology, every categorization system, and every argument about the essence of the medium that emerged from this early period, Galloway's typology of action is ultimately too narrow, too limiting a way to talk about games overall. And these types of systems, if not Galloway's system exactly, have been critiqued to hell and back by folks such as Brendan Keogh and Aubrey Annable, particularly on the grounds that focusing on the action of video games too heavily de-emphasizes the representational aspects of games. And as we'll see, I think that criticism is broadly correct. But, in fairness to Galloway, he is explicit that these categories are meant to be provisional and not prescriptive, and I wouldn't be talking about Galloway if I didn't still find his characterization of video games useful. So let's live in the complexity for a minute. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, in making its protagonist feel more like a real human being than any other AAA video game I've played in a hot minute, reminded me that video games are actions. That is, their aesthetic contribution to the world is that they are an art of action. But where is an action located? What constitutes an action? As I mentioned before, Sonia Fizek intervenes in the discourse on agency and interactivity in games to remind us that our activity, when we're playing a video game, is always delegated into the machine. This is an insight that is particularly salient to video games, but one we can also move outside of the realm of the digital. Imagine what we're seeing here isn't a video game, and just think about the diegetic act, about walking. We think, intuitively, of walking as an action that emanates from the human body. The body moves on its own. It walks. But that's not really true. Walking requires a surface to stand on, something for the feet to push off of. Verifying that we are in fact moving through space, in turn, requires having some kind of sensorial confirmation that our perspective on the world is transforming while we walk. Often, though certainly not always, this is verified through our sense of sight, hearing, or touch. And while these senses are our senses, they are always taking in external data from the outside world that is reflecting the efficacy of our action back to ourselves. I feel the resistance of the ground beneath my feet. I see someone who I couldn't see before after I rounded a corner in a hallway. Walking is not my own action. It is an action that comes into existence only because there is a world that facilitates it and makes it possible. The same with video game actions. When I punch a fascist in the Great Circle, the action isn't just mine. It's an action that is formed in concert with the controller, the code, the historical context of World War II, the narrative context of the game, the visual representation I see on screen, the Foley work, and so on. The game action is not reducible to one pure thing. It is not reducible to my own agency, certainly. It is a bundle of things that combine into punching a fascist. Games are actions because games are contexts, and those contexts are always both playful and representational. And for that reason, video games are a lot more like cinema than a lot of people are willing to admit. But if they were exactly like the movies, they wouldn't be worth playing at all. But with all apologies, I sometimes do think that video games are too much like games for their own good. I'm not saying games should be less interactive. What I mean is that it's very easy for games to reproduce older pleasures. Clearing tasks off of a map, power fantasies. Things that are typical to video games because they are expected, but not because they are what the medium is good for. The sensation of presence that something like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is able to achieve can be the foundation for so many different kinds of contexts, so many kinds of actions. The Great Circle demonstrates even that video games don't need to chase new sorts of actions. That game remixes a lot of conventional action genres and brings them back down to earth in a compelling way, reminding us, that video games are not just about empty escapism or addictive gameplay loops. If our player characters actually behave like people, then the games those player characters are in can resonate with our actual lives. Games can reveal themselves as little aestheticized slices of existence. So when I play video games from here on in, I'll remind myself and I'll implore you to ask, what are the actions I'm taking? What are the components of those actions? How do those actions feel? What do those actions say about the world? About me? Even at their worst, games give us a space for this kind of reflection on action. They have a power to reorganize our perceptions of how we should act in the world. And this is an ambivalent power. Dangerous, potentially anyway, and often not at the forefronts of our minds while we play. I forgot about it even. But it's what I'm going to look out for from here on in. So, thanks for the reminder, Indiana. Hey, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thank you for watching, and wanted to let you know that I am starting a Patreon. Look, my channel's tiny, I'm not expecting this thing to make a ton of money, but I really think it'll be good for my productivity if I am held responsible to an audience. So offering people the chance to throw a little cash my way is a way to kind of keep me honest and make sure that I am consistently producing content. So yeah, if you like what you saw here, if you like any of my other videos, consider throwing me a few bucks. It'll really help out. And you get to vote on what my next video is. So hey, you get a little power. All right. Take care.